Hello. As you may have heard already, BHVR put up a post on Reddit, recently, which basically teased that they might actually revert Trickster soon. And I gotta say, reading this post had me feeling quite validated. I put in a lot of work over the last year trying to do damage control on Trickster's reputation, and I've had to put up with so many people acting like I either don't know what I'm talking about, or that the killer I enjoy isn't worth improving. But when I read this post for the first time, I felt like I won, and all my friends and followers were quite happy for me as well. I've been debating for quite a while on whether I should even make a video about this though. I left a comment on the post and made some tweets on my Twitter, which you should definitely go follow by the way. But I've had a lot on my plate for the past few months, so it isn't exactly news at this point. Plus, at first glance it seemed to just be exactly what I wanted, right? Well, no, it's not that simple. See, the good thing about waiting so long to talk about this is that I've been able to develop and mature my opinion on this proposal and Trickster as a whole. Not only that, but I've gotten my hands on something special today. I'm no longer restricted to just telling you that the proposed rework sucks. I can actually prove it now. So, let's get into it. I figure I should start by saying that I actually like most of the changes in this proposal. Reverting the terror radius to 24 meters, reverting the laceration meter to 6, bringing back his old throw rate and movement speed system, and bringing back popular add-ons like Fizz Spin Soda. These are all changes that I really wanted, and any worthwhile Trickster rework would have them, so I'm happy they're here. Kinda wish I had more to say about them, but it's all stuff I've talked about before, so I don't feel a need to repeat it again. As long as these changes are on the devs' radar, that's enough for me to be happy. But there's a couple of changes here that I really don't like, especially when you pay attention to the things that aren't on the list. For example, let's start with the fact that they want to revert his movement speed back to 4.4 meters per second instead of the current 4.6. On paper, this doesn't sound bad, but with the current state of the game and the rest of this proposal in mind, it's an awful idea. As someone who used to play Trickster when he was 4.4, I can pretty confidently say he actually wasn't bad at all. He struggled a bit in certain tiles, but you could force people out of them really fast with window blocking perks like Bamboozle, or even Crowd Control, his own perk. The reason for that is that maps back in the day were a lot more open and prone to dead zones than they are now, so once a survivor left a tall loop, it would be a while before they found another one. But this isn't the case anymore. If you play Trickster now, it feels like you rarely get line of sight on survivors due to how many tall obstacles they added to all the maps over time. These types of changes are never put in patch notes, but you can really see the difference in a clip like this from back before his rework. Plus, they just don't seem to understand how important his laceration decay rate stat is, especially when you take into account his movement speed. In the Reddit post, they mistakenly said that his current laceration decay delay is 10 seconds, and offered to increase it to 12 as a buff. For reference, his laceration decay delay is currently 15 seconds, and it was 15 seconds back before his rework as well, so this would actually be a 3-second nerf. There's also no mention of increasing the actual laceration decay speed back to what it used to be. So you'd be playing a killer that, at best, only moves 10% faster than survivors, with a power that forces you to stay directly on top of people to do any damage. Not a good combination at all. Moving on though, main event is also getting a really bad deal in this proposal. They're offering to revert it to 30 hits to charge and 30 seconds to activate, just like how it used to be. They also mistakenly said that his current firing speed bonus in main event is 33%, and offered to increase it to 66.7%. His current throwing speed bonus is 66% though, so this proposed buff is a mere 0.7% increase. It's not really giving me much confidence that they can't even get the current stats of the killer right, but regardless, I can pretty confidently say that this version of main event will be awful, and it needs a more significant rework than this. To be honest, the only way this version of main event is ever going to be consistently useful is if we get old death throws back, but that add-on isn't on the list of reversions, so eh. They also aren't reverting main event to its old duration or removing the combo bonus system, so we'll be stuck with broken voice lines, inconsistent duration, and the laughably awful effect from Fizz Spin Soda, which they want to move to Memento Blades. BHVR? Nobody wants this. This add-on is as useless as it is confusing. In conclusion, if this is the Trickster rework we end up getting, he will be absolute garbage, and as you can imagine, this was an incredibly disappointing realization for me to come to. Behavior gave the Trickster community one of the worst reworks a killer has ever gotten when nobody was asking for him to be reworked in the first place. They refused to fix it for over a year, left us talking to a brick wall amongst ourselves, and are now offering us a version of the killer that is weaker than the one we started with. It's really disappointing that I had to put so much work in on this Trickster thing only to be served such a laughably disappointing response after a year of complaining. To me, this is completely unacceptable, so you know what? I decided to take matters into my own hands. I've been working on something behind the scenes, and today I'm finally ready to show it off. So if you still don't believe me about Trickster, allow me to show you exactly what you could be missing out on. Alright, this is the part of the video where a lot of people are going to get confused, but essentially none of this would be possible without Eefernal fog. More info will be in the description, but all you need to know right now is that for the rest of this video, I will be playing on an older, completely separate build of the game with a peer-to-peer connection. This version of the game not only has modding support and communities, but it also has old Trickster from before his rework. Naturally, before testing anything actually, cool, I decided to invite Revium and Vasek to play some 1v1s. It was a pretty emotional experience, as it's been a long time since we've all been able to play with this version of the killer.
Oh, that feels so good! I want to cry! It's so good!
Of course, this old version was very fun and very strong, but I wanted to do more with him. On this private build of the game, I have access to a developer console, which allows me to input commands and make spontaneous changes to gameplay. If you've ever played Team Fortress 2 or any other Source game, you know just how powerful a tool like this can be. Amongst the list of commands, there are certain flags I could enable for Trickster specifically, such as increasing survivor laceration meters, increasing his throwing speed, and allowing his knives to deal double laceration damage beyond a certain distance, which is interesting. I decided to run a simple test first, just increasing his base movement speed from 4.4 to 4.6. This alone made him feel much more lethal, but also a lot less fun to play against initially, as his laceration stats are balanced for the slower movement speed. It was hard to get away from him, and it was hard to lose lacerations at the same time, so it just wasn't very fun to deal with at all. I found this initial test unsatisfying, so I needed a way to do more complex changes. Fortunately, my friend Biri came in to help. She gave me the tools I needed and taught me how to read and edit the code of the game. And literally within minutes, I was able to edit many of Trickster's important stats and create something that was pretty close to what I wanted. I also made a version that closely resembles the Reddit proposal stats so that we can have a little comparison. As I explain the changes I made, I'll compare them both to this old version of Trickster as well as the current version so that you have a good frame of reference for what I'm talking about. First, I decided to keep Trickster's movement speed at 4.6. While the initial playtest I did with it was unsatisfying, I wanted to set out to prove that this could work and be not just fair, but fun. After this, I decided to explore what other changes could work. The first thing I decided to change was his laceration decay stats. In this version, it would pause for 15 seconds after each hit, and once it began depleting, it would deplete in 3.33 seconds per stack if the survivor was running, and 2.5 seconds otherwise. I decided to change this a bit to accommodate the faster movement speed and the much more open maps. Initially, I tried giving him a 10-second pause on each hit, with it taking 2 seconds to remove each stack afterward. This felt a lot better on the survivor's end, but felt like dog ass for the Trickster player. Lacerations would be gone so quickly that it felt like you'd rarely actually injure someone with just 6 hits. So for the final version, I bumped up the delay to 12 seconds and made it so running would cause stacks to deplete in 4 seconds. This overall felt the most reasonable, as it gave a fair chance for survivors to start losing lacerations, but made it so just continuously running around a main building or getting distance would cause you to lose progress a lot slower. There was a bit more reward for the riskier playstyle of staying close to a Trickster while breaking LOS, which felt more fun for everyone to engage with. So these were the numbers I stuck with for the rest of our playtest. Next, I looked at his movement speed in the throw state. Modern Trickster holds a steady 3.86 meters per second for the entire time you spend in the throw state. I, and many other people, don't really like the fact that he barely moves slower than survivors, but I wanted to avoid making his tap firing playstyle worse. Thankfully, old Trickster already had a system in place for this. His movement speed starts out at 3.86, but the more you throw, the slower you begin to move. Unfortunately, it just wasn't properly balanced. For the first 8 consecutive throws, you wouldn't slow down at all. But between your 8th and 30th throw, you would slow down to an absolutely sluggish 3.68 meters per second. I decided to adjust this to be a little more relevant. I made it so you'd begin slowing down after your 3rd throw and reach the minimum speed after the 6th. This makes it so you have to actually be a bit more careful about spamming, as you'll lose a lot more distance, but tap firing and short bursts of fire are just as good as they've always been. After testing the previous changes and finding them good, I decided to make a batch of changes that were just to improve quality of life. I removed recoil, increased the maximum firing speed bonus from 30% to 33%, decreased his reload time from 4 seconds to 3, the same as today, and I made it so lockers are only revealed when you have 11 blades or less, mainly just to alleviate my mental illness. The final 2 changes were experimental, but I had a feeling they would play nicely with every other change. I decreased the windup time to enter the throw state from 0.35 seconds to 0.2 seconds, and decreased the time it takes to exit the throw state from 1.25 seconds to 1 second. This might sound a bit pointless and a bit degenerate at first, but let me explain my thought process. Trickster has a unique double windup, where not only do you have to invest time to enter the throw state, but invest time into throwing your first knife. This makes it so he actually has a longer windup than Nemi's Tentacle Strike and Deathslinger's gun, and he's not even that much faster than a Huntress with windup add-ons, despite the fact he needs a lot more time investment for damage than those killers. So I decided to reduce these numbers to make his tap firing playstyle a bit more smooth, and encourage players to quickly switch between their bat and knives mid-chase to keep the pressure on. Feedback on this was mostly positive, actually. The only complaint is that it took some getting used to, and it was difficult to switch between this version and current Trickster.
Jesus Christ!
I think that the reduction of lift speed and drop speed of the knife is very productive to keeping the gameplay seamless and encouraging of tap firing.
It throws me off, but I mean, if it were official, I would get used to. Yeah, I was just gonna say, if it were like official, I'd get used to it pretty quickly.
I was a bit worried about the put away time making M2 faking a bit too easy, but this really didn't seem like enough to make a difference. If a Trickster wants to put away his knives to get an M1, he's definitely going to be able to do it anyway, so this change doesn't really allow him to do it more, it just makes him feel better overall.
Fuck you.
And when I finally settled in on these stats, this rework was starting to feel amazing. I felt very comfortable playing him, which is definitely not something I can say about modern day Trickster. And thankfully, everyone I played with was also a big fan of my Trickster, whether they were in control of him or playing against him. But unfortunately, I ran into a really stupid problem. One of my earliest decisions was cutting main event's duration down to 5 seconds to make it take more skill and precise timing to make use of. The 9 to 10 second main event we've always had ends up feeling less like this intense burst of lethality it's presented as, and more like spraying a garden hose on the jet setting. Of course, this nerf would require a lot of compensation though, so I tried a few things. First, I decreased the amount of hits required to charge main event to 10 and decreased the activation window to 20 seconds. These felt like fair numbers, but the ability was still unexciting to use, so I did a bit more. My first weird experiment was lowering Trickster's throwing speed, but increasing his movement speed. This sucked ass. After that, I decided to go the opposite direction, returning the movement speed to normal, but massively increasing the firing speed bonus from 66% to 150%, which, to be completely honest, felt incredible.
That feels incredible.
That's what I just said. But even though base kit main event felt really nice and really fun, add-ons made this very problematic. Trickster nowadays already has so many main event add-ons, but this version of Trickster has ones that are more impactful. Tequila Moonrock gives you a much longer main event duration with no downsides. Death Row's Compilation gives you all of your ammo back when main event ends with no downside. And Watch gives you essentially infinite main event duration and has no downside. It becomes a lot harder to balance this base kit when such add-ons exist, and unfortunately it wasn't possible possible for me to add a charge penalty for missed shots like I wanted, so I had to settle with tuning everything down a bit to compensate. I decreased his movement speed to 3.6 during main event, increased the hits to charge main event to 15, decreased the activation window to 10 seconds, and lowered the firing speed bonus to 133%. And this was the version we played with in all of our playtests going forward. Not perfect, but it was the best I could do at the time.
Speaking of add-ons, I also reworked a few of them with the hopes of creating a bit more playstyle variety and fixing a few balancing issues in the base kit. First, I reworked Memento blades to be a lot more interesting. It makes it so you have the maximum throwing speed at all times, but it increases the laceration meter to 8 hits. As you can tell, this heavily resembles current Trickster, which I think puts it into a unique position of allowing people to play with a legacy version of a character they might prefer. However, it has the downside of reducing your maximum speed in the throw state as well, so that's something to keep in mind. Also, unlike current Trickster, his arms don't break while throwing, which is nice. Next, I dug around in Behavior's trash can and found the original version of Death Throws compilation. When using this add-on, your blades deal a minimum of 50% laceration per hit, but hitting multiple shots in a row or hitting shots from long distances will increase the amount of laceration blades applied by an extra 50%, up to a maximum of 200% per blade. But missing so much as one shot will reset your next shot's damage to the minimum of 50% again. This add-on was really cool to play with if you only focused on chases, but it quickly became clear why this isn't used nowadays. I like the idea of an add-on that rewards consistent accuracy, but this is too much when it also works during full rapid fire. It also never goes away unless you miss, so you can play extremely safe and pocket it for situations where you want to defend something, hit during vaults, or go through body blockers quickly. This version of the add-on was obviously pretty broken, but despite that, it was still fun to play against in most situations. I think if the devs wanted an effect like this to be brought back, it would have to have some other deactivation condition to make sure you can't just pocket it forever, but otherwise, it was cool. As for the rest of his add-ons, I just did some pretty typical balancing adjustments. I'd explain them, but I don't really think that's interesting enough to go into. Just join my Discord if you're curious. And after a big round of playtests, there were very few complaints, surprisingly. Everyone really enjoyed the games and really liked playing with my version.
So in general, I felt like the changes that we made were really good and definitely took it in a better direction.
He felt so much better than how we have Trickster now. Like, it felt better than OG Trickster in my opinion, and it feels a lot better than how we have Trickster now.
Except Vasek, I guess.
Like that was terrible. Also the main event duration window, it was pathetic. So there was only one thing that felt right, and that was the kind of busted main event throw rate, but it was only 5 seconds. I don't know, I didn't really have that much fun.
Now, after all that, I wanted to reflect on what I learned from this experience. For one, I learned that modding killers is really fun. I did several experiments with other killers as well to varying degrees of success, but ultimately all of them made me excited thinking about where it's possible to improve certain killers without having to make major changes. I also got some insight into how these kinds of number tweak updates are made, and it gave me a bit more appreciation for them as a result. These likely aren't the result of long internal playtesting sessions, they're just devs trying to make small improvements to see how little they can get away with. I think these updates are generally nice, but I think Behavior could honestly play it a lot less safe in the future. This rework I did for Trickster shows that with no coding experience and a heavy amount of technical restrictions, I could still create a pretty beautiful rework that was really fun, really strong, and surprisingly balanced. I think if Behavior was a bit more forward with their community, they could probably make much bigger, better improvements to killers in shorter spans of time. And on that note, I want to conclude that thought by saying Behavior should really make something like this, officially. Just think about dedicated fans playtesting balance changes in their own time, sharing their findings with the community and, by extension, Behavior. They could work together with the community instead of constantly fighting with us all the time, which would be pretty rad. And finally, the most important thing I learned from all this is that, oh my god, the proposed Reddit version sucks so much ass! I couldn't even be bothered to play an actual 4v1 match with it. This version of the killer is miserable in comparison to what I made. Due to his low speed and how quickly people lose lacerations, it's borderline impossible to play any tile. And just forget about hitting people out in the distance, they're just going to lose lacerations by the time you catch up. Main event was rare and absolutely useless when it activated. That was my entire main event.
That was so short.
And now imagine this, but with this already terrible add-on variety. Bleh. If this version of the killer hits any server, PTB or otherwise, he's doomed. But thankfully, it seems like he won't. While I was finishing up this video, BHVR released another post about Trickster, which implied that instead of going forward with the old proposal, they're going to try some new things. I knew y'all were going to spam me in the comments asking about this if I didn't mention it, but unfortunately, there isn't really much to say about this other than it exists. The only info I can glean from this is that it seems like they're going to be designing this for the Trickster players rather than just trying to coddle to people who don't like him anyway, so that's good at least. But other than that, there's no hint or even a riddle about what this update might entail, so there's really nothing I can say other than to check out my proposed Trickster changes in the description and pinned comment. Thank you. Anyway, I hope this little experimental video has been interesting, but that's all the time I've got today. I want to give a big thank you to all the people who helped make this video possible via playtesting, modding help, and supporting the private server project. And a very special thank you to all the people who've gone out of their way to directly support me through YouTube memberships, server boosts, and Ko-fi donations such as Aya, Cody, Lettuce, Deck, Scarletus, Uxie, and The Wildfire. Y'all have been getting very early teasers of this video and a few others that I'm working on, so I hope whatever you spent has felt worth it. And finally, I want to give a huge thank you to you for watching, as all the support I've received from these videos has helped me get through some really hard times. So if you're here right now, thank you, and good night.